If you've ever visited Parliament Hill in Ottawa, there's a good chance you saw some protesters. Canadians exercising their charter right of freedom of peaceful assembly. However, what you don't see every day is Canadian scientists in white lab coats protesting in the streets and marching to Parliament Hill. What could get these mild-mannered researchers so riled up? They claim they're muzzled, not allowed to speak about their research. There's stories of environmental research being shut down. This is the strange case of the muzzled and mad scientists.
What we're seeing that I think is unique is scientists themselves taking to the streets and marching and saying, you know, this goes way beyond who the government of the day is, where they sit on the ideological spectrum, that they feel, you know, so incensed that they are marching in the streets, I think is a totally unique development in our history.
For several years, scientists have been raising the alarm about federal communication policies, cuts to key environmental projects, and the federal government's move away from funding basic science. For their part, the government states their push for applied research is good for the economy and good for jobs.
Nowhere else in the world that I'm aware of, nowhere else in the democratic world anyway, do you see the degree of manipulation, the amount of sort of defunding of critical data gathering and data interpretation. And I think it's been extraordinarily damaging to Canada's reputation internationally, particularly in those fields, in climate science, in the aquatic sciences, some of the other natural sciences, where we had a world-class reputation. And so the cost in the long term is extraordinary. The risk is extraordinary, especially now where we are seeing these mounting costs of climate change. That, you know, if any time was the time to be, you know, doubling down on that research effort, now's the time. We need to know what's happening. It's going to get very, very difficult to respond to, even if we had good data.
The claim that somehow less science means bad policy is a claim that is absolutely ludicrous as far as I can tell. You would want your policy to be informed by science, absolutely. But governments have to balance the scientific evidence against public opinion, economic growth, environmental protection, and that's the art of politics, is balancing these things out. Science is one ingredient, it's not the only thing that matters. The government has shifted its spending from public interest defined as protecting the environment or public interest as consumer safety, and they've, like the Liberals before them, are spending money on public interest defined as growing the economy or ensuring Canada's natural resources are exploited to the max, because of course that's a very important part of the Canadian economy. So it's not that the government is saying we want less science, we just want different science.
So, you know, they have put quite a lot of money towards science, but what they've done is almost all of that new money, and they've shifted a bunch of the old pool of money and put it pretty much all into sort of industrial partnerships and research that, you know, really is only benefiting industry, whereas that's been at the expense of, you know, sort of what we call basic or curiosity-driven research. So if you look at almost all of, you know, the innovations that we use today, things like cell phones, MRI machines, Velcro, laser technology, you know, the science for all of those things started with basic curiosity-driven research. So, you know, I can see how it makes sense to put all your money into the end of it, that's sort of applied science. But, you know, what's going to happen, you know, 10, 15, 20 years down the road when, you know, that wellspring of basic research has dried up?
Critics cite the defunding of the experimental lakes area as an example of the government's agenda of avoiding inconvenient results.
ELA is an experimental lakes area, is a tremendously successful, tremendously efficient experiment over the last 40 years that's helped us with acid rain and detergents, and, you know, it's really helped the environment, it's really helped the innovation along. And the government decided to basically shut it down.
it's the only place in the world where we can do experiments on entire lakes. So it really didn't make sense to me that, especially with climate change and, growing resource extraction, these are all things where we need to study what is the impact of these things going to be on our freshwater system. So, it seems to me like we need this research station now more than ever.
It boggles the mind why they would want to close that down.
The experimental lakes area, through its 40-year history, has again and again discovered really, really major impacts of large-scale industry on the natural environment. That kind of science gets in the way of your policy. And if you sort of look at it as I believe this government does under Stephen Harper, they see this as a nuisance. They see this as a thing that is a drag on industry, unnecessarily fussy about how industry does what it does. And rather than simply dismiss the evidence that what they're doing is not necessarily the best direction for policy, they're actually trying to undermine and dismantle those parts of government that produce that data.
In the public mind, there's something magical about scientists. Well, it sounds important, it must be important. And so to that extent, they have a more appealing story to tell than the guy who works for, the Canada Revenue Agency, for example. We typically don't like the guy, the tax man, but well, if somebody's studying fish, that seems somehow important somehow.
The answer to the situation may be found by looking to our neighbor to the south.
During the Bush era, very much the same thing was going on. Scientists were, for lack of a better word, indirectly or directly muzzled. When Obama came in,
and gathered here are scientists, engineers, business leaders.
It opened it up a bit. And that was because of the work of the Union of Concerned Scientists in the States.
Well, Canadian scientists are where U.S. scientists were about a decade ago in terms of trying to figure out how they can get their research out with a government that's more concerned about message control.
So I think we're going that way in this country. It's just slow to get there. And I'm hoping that, we'll open the doors and allow scientists to talk about their work.
In an effort to get hard data on the scope of the problem, the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada commissioned a poll of federal scientists. The results are damning. 9 out of 10 scientists have felt muzzled. A full 87% couldn't speak without departmental retaliation, even if public health, safety, and the environment were in harm's way. And nearly half are aware of actual cases where information was suppressed.
It's the hubris of scientists that says, if the government doesn't do what I suggest the government should do, the government is by definition wrong. Or it's the hubris of saying, science good, politics bad. And that proposition does not hold water. It makes absolutely no sense.
Science is a long-term investment. Science doesn't pay like widgets, selling 20 widgets today and you make $50 or 5%. Science is an investment that pays huge dividends 20 years down the road. So any government that doesn't support science is short-sighted, very short-sighted, and it's a government that's probably better running a candy store than running a country.